Reddish dust swirled across the wasteland, lifted on the hot gusts that blew ceaselessly over dunes of crumbled steel. The sky above was a perpetual haze of copper-colored clouds, remnants of cataclysmic storms that had ravaged the land long before most of the current survivors were born. Everything smelled of corroded iron, and the taste of rust clung to the back of every throat. The skeletons of collapsed factories and shattered skyscrapers lay scattered across this barren domain, their twisted girders jutting from the earth like the rib bones of long-dead beasts. It was a lifeless vista at first glance, nothing more than a sprawl of decay under a dying sun. But hidden beneath the scraps, pockets of life endured. Small oases of water, patches of edible fungus, and caches of scavenged scrap metal were the treasures that fueled the ambitions of warring clans. Resources had grown perilously scarce, so survival in this vast desert of time-worn steel came down to cunning, guile, and an unflinching will to seize the next opportunity. In their fierce struggle, empathy was often a luxury, overshadowed by the pressing need to secure fresh spoils for one's own kin. And so, the pale horizon crackled with tension every time a new rumor of found bounty emerged. Among the clans that roamed these desolate lands, tales of the ancient rust tanks had become the stuff of legend. These immense reservoirs of water, if they had ever truly existed, held supernatural mystique. According to stories passed down around fires, the tanks were hidden away in the bowels of a ruined stronghold. The rumor claimed that the water remained pure, untouched by the toxic haze that corroded most natural wells. Whispers circulated among drifters that those who found the tanks could reshape the world in their own image, or hoard their spoils in monstrous tyranny. For Garrick, a scout of the Iron Wisp clan, these were more than mere fables. He had seen glimpses of the rumored stronghold himself, strange piping in the subterranean tunnels, flaking steel that moistened to the touch in the deeper recesses, and archaic valves rusted shut. But the swirling dust and rubble made journeys into that labyrinth perilous, and mechanical beasts' centuries-old security drones still roamed its darkest corridors. Garrick's clan existed in the periphery of fading hopes, certain that finding an untainted water source would transform their precarious existence into something more stable. With each new sunrise, it was becoming ever more urgent. People were dying from thirst, or disease, or simply lost the will to keep roaming. Children coughed behind torn masks, while the elders spent their days hacking up rust-laced sputum. The Iron Wisp clan needed the rumored water for any chance at tomorrow. As dusk claimed the sky, Garrick returned to the Iron Wisp encampment, nestled along the rusted hull of what might once have been a ship. Torn sails fluttered in the wind, acting as tattered banners for the small group that huddled within. There were no warm welcomes, no hearty meals. Everyone was too weary for such pleasantries. Garrick's mission to investigate the stronghold was fraught with danger, and his shoulders felt bowed beneath the weight of that responsibility. He slipped past the sentries' men and women whose eyes were sunken into their skulls from endless nights of watch duty. Once inside, he found the clan's leader, Maruva, crouched over a crude map. She was a tall woman with a sun-scorched face and wiry hair that crackled with static from the stormy air. Her gaze lifted as Garrick approached. Without needing to speak, she pulled aside a flap on a nearby table to reveal a shallow pan of heavily filtered water. Garrick accepted a small ladleful gratefully, letting the lukewarm liquid trickle down his dry throat, when he reported that he had discovered more metallic pipework leading deeper into the underground tunnels, pipework that might connect to water reserves. Maruva's grim features tightened with desperate hope. She pressed him for new details, but he had few. Much of it was guesswork, a puzzle of rusted clues about how water might still flow. Still, she saw no alternative. They would need to mount a larger expedition into the stronghold, a risky endeavor, but one holding the possibility of salvation. Despite the Iron Wisp clan's fervor, word traveled fast in the wasteland. Rumors of a water source had also reached the ears of the Bloodbrine clan, whose cruelty was matched only by their ruthlessness. Led by a towering figure called Magnus the Harrower, these warriors thrived on raiding weaker settlements and hoarding scraps of technology they barely understood. They had turned robbery into an art form, launching swift attacks under the cover of swirling red storms. Garrick had seen the aftermaths of blood-brine raids, the gutted encampments, the hollow-eyed survivors left with no recourse but to wander until, inevitably, the desert claimed them. Whenever the blood-brine struck, it was like a plague that left only ashes and tears in its wake. Now, with the whispered promise of abundant water, this savage clan was on the move. Their rust-encrusted vehicles belched black smoke as they rumbled across the terrain. Rumors said they had a mechanized champion who wielded a blade made of tungsten, forged and salvage found deep underground. No one knew exactly where they had gained such advanced artifacts. Most suspected it was part luck, part cunning treachery. Yet the Bloodbrine clan's hunger was not limited to water alone. They wanted dominion over every living soul. For them, control of the rumored rust tanks was the stepping stone to majesty in a broken world. By dawn's first light, Maruva assembled a group of volunteers, a daring strike team of scouts, warriors, and tinkerers who had proven themselves in past scrapes. Among them was Oral, a grim mechanic who carried a satchel of improvised explosives. Cora, a skilled marksman with a single working eye, tested her crossbow meticulously, adjusting the windings that allowed it to hurl bolts with lethal accuracy. There was also Dowlin, an older desert tracker with a curse-like sense for spotting ambush lines. Garrick felt a sense of camaraderie with these individuals. Their conversations were sparse but steeped in mutual respect. They knew the price they might pay. Before the group departed, Maruva gifted them each a ration of the precious water the clan had left, just enough to keep them going. She reminded them of the intangible treasure at stake, the children, the elders, the entire Ironwisp future. The face of each clan member bore the same haunted look, a mixture of frailty and determination, begging these scouts to succeed. In that moment, Garrick swore he would not let them down. So they set off on foot, slinking among craggy outcroppings of discarded steel, guided by the half-light of dawn into a no-man's land littered with half-buried debris. Traveling through the twisted corridor of junk felt like traversing the bones of some colossal beast. Every step crunched on fractured metal sheets or scattered bits of old electronics. Occasionally the group would freeze, hearing a distant rumble that could indicate blood-brine vehicles. Once or twice, they spotted patrols from a distance, ragtag bands in mismatched armor, riding contraptions that coughed up thick clouds of exhaust. Garrick signaled silent instructions to his companions, and they pivoted to a different route. As midday approached, the sun's heat was relentless, and many in the group stripped down to minimal clothing, except for protective face wrappings to keep stray flakes of rust from searing their skin. Dehydration lurked constantly. Even with rationing, they could feel some weakness creeping into their limbs, yet the promise of water propelled them onward. The path descended from the open desert into a hidden canyon carved by ancient storms. The walls of the gorge were lined with corroded pipes that dripped an oily residue. Each drip that splashed onto the rocks below made a sizzling sound, a chemical stench choking the air. "This must be connected to something deeper," Orel muttered, adjusting his satchel and carefully eyeing the overhead piping. Though the atmosphere was suffocating, the canyon also provided a semblance of cover from aerial patrols or roaming drones. It was at the canyon's end that they encountered the first sign of the stronghold's entrance. Massive steel gates, half buried in debris, leaning at a precarious angle. The gates bore the marks of centuries of acid rain, their surfaces pitted with dents and jagged scars. Overhead, a leftover security turret from a bygone era perched, its sensor lens flickering uselessly. Garrick didn't trust that it was completely inoperative, so they snuck forward, hugging the outer wall where the turret's angle might not reach. Once close, they realized the gates were wedged in place. Forcing them open would be impossible without heavy machinery. Orel inspected a smaller maintenance hatch at the side. He gave a grim nod. He could blast it open, but that would alert every living thing inside to their presence. With no alternative, Maruva's strike team prepared for trouble. They set up a makeshift firing line behind a barricade of metal shards. Garrick rigged a smoke canister, and when Orel's improvised bomb went off, the shriek of tearing steel reverberated through the canyon. Dust and sparks filled the air. The group clambered through the opening as fast as they could, stepping into a corridor lit by intermittent flickers of hazard lights, struggling on sparse emergency power. Inside, the walls were a labyrinth of pipes, mesh walkways, and grated floors. Thick layers of rust rained down with every footstep. The choking air felt ages old, and the floor was slick with chemical residue. As the group advanced, they found entire sections collapsed under the weight of time, forcing them to pick careful paths. Occasionally, they discovered ancient signage, symbols pointing to a water filtration wing or showcasing emergency drill routes. Despite the sense of dread, excitement mounted. There might be water sources that had remained sealed behind thick doors, untouched by the outside world. Hope surged in Garrick's chest. Then, they heard metallic scuttling. Creeping from a side passage came the first of the security drones, a spider-like device with tibbies of corroded steel. Its single red optic flickered in the dimness, scanning for intruders. Cora unleashed a crossbow bolt that slammed into its chassis, but the drone let out a burst of mechanical hiss, scurrying forward in a lethal burst. Garrick and Dallin leapt aside as it lashed out with a spindly limb. Aurel slammed an iron spanner into the drone's optic, and with a final spasm, the machine collapsed. The group pressed on, mindful that these drones likely roam the entire complex. Intermittent alarms began to wail, echoing through the corridors in discordant howls. Navigating deeper, the team finally reached a giant vault door labeled Reservoir. This was where Maruva had believed the rumor was anchored. The door's surface was heavily reinforced, showing only superficial rust. With a grunt of effort, Aurel set to work on the control panel. Sparks shot out as he tried to override decades-old systems. The alarms by now were blaring in a chaotic cacophony. Sensing an impending confrontation, Garrick turned to see flickers of movement in the gloom. Shadows elongated, and the pounding of footsteps grew. Blood-brined raiders began pouring into the corridor, drawn by the detonation and the possibility of easy prey. Their arrival brought savage war cries and muzzle flashes from makeshift firearms. Cora picked off 2 of them with perfectly placed crossbow bolts, while Dallin dropped to one knee, returning fire with a battered rifle. The corridor exploded in chaos, ricocheting bullets, crossbow bolts slicing the darkness, and the metallic scrape of steel on steel. Garrick lunged at a raider who swung an improvised machete, barely dodging the blow. His own blade, a sharpened chunk of rebar, drove forward, finding the raider's flank. Blood spattered across the grated floor, and the man collapsed with a ragged gasp. Even amid the swirling madness, Garrick's gaze darted toward Aurel, who was cursing under his breath, trying to get the vault door open. A guttural roar sliced above the noise, and towering through the gloom was Magnus the Harrower, helmet glinting under malfunctioning lights. He wore a chest plate hammered together from salvage, and in his hands a tungsten blade that gleamed malevolently. Raiders parted, giving him space to stand like a conqueror in the corridor. Garrick felt a jolt of terror but stood his ground. Magnus stepped forward, face hidden behind a smoked visor, voice booming with twisted triumph. "Iron Whisk scum! Did you truly believe you could claim the greatest treasure in the wastes without my notice?" With a thunderous blow, Magnus slammed his sword against the floor, sending sparks radiating outward. A pair of raiders launched themselves at Cora before she could reload. She drew a makeshift dagger and fought furiously, but one of the raiders pinned her against a wall. Another hammered at Dallin with a heavy pipe, knocking him to the ground. At that moment, Aurel shouted triumphantly. The vault door's lock clicked and the metal barrier began to rumble open in halting motions. Garrick leapt to Cora's aid, forcing back the raider with a savage elbow to his face, then dragging Cora away from harm. A bullet whizzed by, narrowly missing Garrick's shoulder. The air was frantic with muzzle flashes and the screech of metal on metal. Finally, the vault door groaned fully open, revealing a swirling chamber beyond. Within the vault was a sight that almost froze Garrick's heart. Liquid glistened under half-shattered lights in a massive reservoir. Rusting catwalks spanned the chamber, suspended over a pool of water that, by some marvel, looked clear. Thick pipes disappeared into the floor and ceiling, presumably controlling inflow and outflow. Steam hissed from occasional vents. Whatever filtration system existed here was still operational, though running on minimal power. Garrick couldn't tear his eyes from the shimmer of that water. It wasn't the brackish sludge one typically found outside. Even from a distance, it held a clarity he hadn't seen in his entire life. But the blood-brine raiders weren't awed. They were hungry to claim it as their own. Magnus charged forward, tungsten blade raised, prepared to cut down anyone in his path. Aurel and Dallin unleashed a volley of gunfire. Sparks flew where bullets pinged off the blood-brine leader's chest plate. Still, the heavy tungsten edge yopped through the air, forcing them into a frantic retreat. Cora, though wounded, lifted her crossbow one last time and fired. The bolt hammered into Magnus's side, cracking part of his armor. He let out a guttural snarl, lurching back momentarily. Now pinned between the savage blood-brine and their own dire need to secure the water, the Iron Wisp group searched desperately for some advantage. Garrick sprinted to a nearby control console, scanning the flickering readouts. Some were beyond his comprehension, but he recognized a large valve lever that might flush or redirect water. If they couldn't claim the reservoir easily, maybe they could deny it to the raiders, or at least buy themselves time. Oil-slick sweat beaded on his forehead as he wrestled with the lever. With a fierce tug, it gave way, and a deafening roar echoed through the chamber as the water level began shifting. A massive current churned from the bottom of the reservoir, and the catwalk shuddered under the onslaught. Blood-brine warriors stumbled, some nearly tumbling into the swirling depths below. The air was thick with the tang of moisture that felt like a miracle, yet terrifying in its power. Garrick signaled his companions, urging them onto the central catwalk that led to a narrower corridor on the far side, presumably leading deeper into the facility, where they might funnel the water out, or at least secure it. Magnus roared again, ignoring his own injuries as he attempted to follow, lunging sword first toward Garrick. Their blades clashed in glaring sparks, the tungsten edge biting into Garrick's rebar sword. The impact numbed Garrick's arm, nearly causing him to drop his weapon. Yet he twisted away, pivoting backward down the walkway. Each clang reverberated amid the alarm sirens. Not all the blood-brine had been disoriented. Some sniped from behind twisted railings. A bullet grazed Aurel's shoulder. Another ricocheted off Dallin's rifle, sending him sprawling. Garrick realized they were outnumbered. If they remained here, the blood-brine would eventually overwhelm them, but there was no time to second-guess. With a nod to his team, Garrick rushed forward, parrying wild slashes from Magnus in an attempt to draw the blood-brine leader's attention. He succeeded, but it was like standing before a hurricane. Sparks whirled every time tungsten met rebar. Finally, Garrick's blade snapped under the relentless pounding, leaving him stumbling back, breath ragged. With a triumphant sneer, Magnus raised his sword to deliver a final blow. In that split second, Cora, battered and bleeding, steadied her crossbow and fired the one bolt left in her quiver. It struck true, piercing Magnus's visor. There was a tortured howl as the blood-brine leader reeled. Aurel took the chance, pushing forward with a small homemade explosive jammed into a crevice of Magnus's armor. A bright flash, and Magnus the Harrower fell, flames licking at his chest plate. Shock rippled through the blood-brine ranks as they watched their champion collapse, his final moments consumed by fire. Without their leader's guiding fury, many raiders hesitated, some turning to flee. Seizing the opportunity, Maruva's group and the handful of Iron Wisp who had joined partway regrouped on the catwalk. Garrick, breath scorched and adrenaline pumping, stared at the swirling water below. For the first time in living memory, here was a source of water so pure it almost shone, yet it was guarded by complexities. Half-broken machinery, lethal drones, and the looming threat that the blood-brine or other clans could return in force. Many corridors branched deeper into the stronghold, possibly leading to distribution pipelines or more hidden chambers. It was no simple matter of scooping and drinking. Still, it was more than a rumor now. The reservoir existed. Despite their losses, the Iron Wisp clan could possibly rebuild around this place, guard it, harness its filtration system, if they could find enough parts for repairs, and eventually share what they couldn't fully use themselves. Garrick's mind spun with the enormity of the task. The price had been high. Some of their numbers wouldn't return, and the fights ahead to protect their newfound treasure would be savage. Yet for the first time, a shard of genuine hope took root in his chest, sharper and brighter than any razor blade. The team took cautious steps down into the corridor, deciding they must secure the entire space before calling in the rest of their clan. As the alarms toned down into sporadic wails, the battered group stumbled upon a lower chamber brimming with filtration gear. A labyrinth of large tubes and pressurized vessels hissed quietly, faint lights glowing on their control panels. Age had not fully claimed these machines, though they looked precarious. Garrick imagined a future where the Iron Wisp clan could restore them, using the water here for farming, for forging new alliances, and for shifting a dying clan into one that might thrive. The war for resources would never truly end in the wasteland. There would always be raiders and rival clans hungry for domination or survival. But in that moment, hope shimmered with the promise of water. Searching through the chamber, they found a battered microphone system that apparently linked to the stronghold's intercom. Garrick pressed a button, and after a screech of static, he uttered a single sentence for those who might still lurk nearby, friend or foe. "We have water, and if you seek peace, come to us." His voice felt small in the echoes of the deserted corridors, but it was a statement no less, an answer to the bleakness outside, a stand of defiance against the cycle of bloodshed. In the churn of that rusted realm, it might be enough to spark a different kind of possibility. The group spent the next few hours barricading the main entry points and sealing off the reservoir chamber. They set up vantage points overlooking the corridors, tasks complicated by the threat of more raiders or malfunctioning drones. The hume of dripping water reverberated against the silence, offering a surreal calm in the aftermath of violence. When the last barrier had been rigged, they took a moment to gather around one of the spigots. Oral coaxed a trickle of water from the ancient piping into a metal canteen, and each one took a sip. Though gritty with rust sediment, it was life itself. Garrick felt the tears in his own eyes, tears that were a generational rarity in a climate ruled by dryness. This moment was a testament to resilience. Tomorrow the blood brine might regroup, or other clans might come knocking, but at least for a fleeting time, they had found a salvation worth defending. The hush of the stronghold replaced the echo of gunfire, and the battered companions shared a silent vow around that canteen. They would fight for this water. They would learn to purify and share it, to uphold the dignity still left in their battered hearts. And if the scorched earth outside demanded more blood for each day of survival, then so be it. Survival itself was only half the story. The other half was the hope that one day the wasteland of rust and decay might bloom anew, fed by a reservoir that refused to yield to time or brutality. In the interim, they would stand guard at the heart of the stronghold, the hum of ancient pipes a lullaby to a desolate land. Even in a broken world, where entire kingdoms of metal cowered under a toxic sky, this water signaled that not all was lost. And so, they stationed themselves in the flickering corridor, scanning the swirling dust beyond, prepared to protect their newly claimed lifeline against all comers. Above, the dying sun cast long shadows through the broken gates, the brilliance of dust motes dancing on the breeze testament that in a realm ruled by rust and scorched to its core, life, though fragile, still found a way to endure.